From DHK, the World News Tonight with Matt Waldron.
Good evening, I'm Matt Waldron. Here are the headlines. Czech President signs Lisbon Treaty. Karadzic is defiant in court. More effort pledged on climate change. And Fiji is expelling Australian diplomats in 24 hours. The Conservative Party has apparently scrapped its plan to hold a referendum on the European Union's Lisbon Treaty after Czech President Václav Klaus became the last EU leader to ratify it. Shadow Foreign Secretary William Hague said, "What has happened today means that it is no longer possible to have a referendum on the Lisbon Treaty." Tory leader David Cameron will formally announce on Wednesday what policy the Conservatives will take on the treaty if they win the next general election. The treaty, aimed at boosting Europe's role in global foreign affairs, creates the post of European Council President and also changes the way member states vote. It could now come into force as early as December. The treaty's supporters say it means the EU will work more efficiently and have more influence in world affairs, but those who oppose the changes say the treaty hands over too many national powers to Brussels. Foreign Secretary David Miliband has denounced Mr Cameron's position as false and dangerous, saying he would not be able to deliver his promised concessions from Brussels. So much for David Cameron's cast-iron guarantee to hold a referendum on the Lisbon Treaty, he said. He is still not being honest with people. The fact is, you can't simply opt out of treaty obligations because to do so you need the agreement of the 26 other member states. He is willing to risk Britain's standing and the rights of British people because he is still not prepared to stand up to the right of his own party. Former Bosnian Serb leader Radovan Karadzic has made his first appearance at his war crimes trial in The Hague to ask for more time to consider his case. Karadzic, who is representing himself, has defiantly argued for a further 10 months to prepare his defence. This has forced the judges to again adjourn proceedings while they decide what to do about Karadzic's persistent boycott. He faces 11 charges of genocide, war crimes and crimes against humanity relating to the 1992 to 1995 Bosnian War, including one over the 43-month siege of Sarajevo and 2 for the massacre at Srebrenica. He denies all the charges. British mercenary Simon Mann has been pardoned for his part in attempting to overthrow the government of Equatorial Guinea. The ex-SAS officer was jailed for 34 years in July last year for helping plan a coup in the tiny West African country. President Teodoro Obiang Nguema said he had freed Mann, a friend of ex-Prime Minister Baroness Thatcher's son, Sir Mark Thatcher, for compassionate reasons. Equatorial Guinea's Communication Ministry said in a statement, "The pardon was allowed for by presidential decree and granted on humanitarian grounds." The Old Etonian was originally arrested with around 70 other people, mostly former soldiers, when their aircraft arrived at an airport in the Zimbabwean capital Harare in March 2004. China has given the green light for Walt Disney to build its long-awaited first theme park on the mainland in Shanghai after a decade of negotiations. The announcement of the deal, which would be one of the biggest ever foreign investments in China, comes less than 2 weeks before US President Barack Obama makes his first official visit to China. Neither side disclosed any figures or gave a time frame for reaching a final agreement, but previous reports have said the US entertainment giant will invest $3.6 billion in the 10 square kilometre park. China is one of the most dynamic, exciting and important countries in the world, and this approval marks a very significant milestone for the Walt Disney Company in mainland China, Disney President Robert Iger said. The Shanghai government said in a statement that approval had been granted late last month, and both sides had started in-depth talks on details of the project to build a world-class Disneyland. Disney said the government approval of the project would allow both sides to move forward toward a final agreement to build and operate the Magic Kingdom-style theme park with characteristics tailored to the Shanghai region. When asked how long negotiations could last, a Disney executive said it may take several more months. The Commissioner for Tourism, Margaret Fong, says she believes Hong Kong Disneyland will remain competitive with unique attractions seen nowhere else in the world. She said the government would continue to invest in other projects to attract visitors. However, Democratic Party Vice Chairwoman Emily Lau said the Shanghai Park is bad news for Hong Kong. She said the government should tell the Legislative Council what it will do to counter the competition from the mainland. President Barack Obama and European Union leaders have pledged to redouble efforts for a deal on climate change at next month's summit in Copenhagen, but gave no details of how to reach that ambitious goal. We discussed climate change extensively, and all of us agreed that it was imperative for us to redouble our efforts in the weeks between now and the Copenhagen meeting to ensure that we create a framework for progress, Mr. Obama told reporters in Washington. The UN conference to fight climate change will be held in Copenhagen from December 7th to 18th, pitting emerging economic powerhouses, China and India, against Western industrial nations in the drive to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Mr. Obama spoke after a White House meeting with European Commission President José Manuel Barroso, EU Foreign Affairs Chief Javier Solana, and Swedish Prime Minister Fredrik Reinfeldt, whose country currently holds the EU's collective presidency. The Europeans sounded optimistic a deal was within reach. Regarding climate change, I want to tell you that I am more confident now than I was in days before, said Mr. Barroso. Mr. Barroso earlier told reporters not to expect a full-fledged binding treaty, Kyoto type, by Copenhagen. But German Chancellor Angela Merkel told US lawmakers after meeting with Mr. Obama earlier on Tuesday that a deal was urgent and there was no time to lose. People have been voting in a number of state and local elections in the United States, including 2 gubernatorial polls which correspondents say could serve as an indicator of how voters feel about President Obama's policies. Early results from one of those races, the election of a new governor in the state of Virginia, give a strong lead to the Republican candidate Robert McDonnell. The Vatican has reacted angrily to a European Court of Human Rights ruling that crucifixes should be removed from Italian classrooms. The ruling of the European Court was received in the Vatican with shock and sadness, said Vatican spokesman Father Federico Lombardi, adding that it was wrong and myopic to try to exclude a symbol of charity from education. The ruling by the court in Strasbourg, which Italy said it would appeal against, said crucifixes on school walls, a common sight that is part of every Italian's life, could disturb children who were not Christians. This is an abhorrent ruling, said Rocco Bottiglione, a former culture minister who helped write papal encyclicals. It must be rejected with firmness. Italy has its culture, its traditions, and its history. Those who come among us must understand and accept this culture and this history, he said. The operators of an oil rig that has been spilling oil into the Timor Sea off Australia for 10 weeks say the leak has been plugged. A major fire on the structure, which broke out on Sunday, has been brought under control. Officials with PTTEP Australasia, Thailand's national petroleum exploration company, said a mixture of heavy mud and brine poured into the well finally stopped the leak. The blaze started when workers were pouring the mud into a hole that had been leaking an estimated 400 barrels of oil a day since August 21st. The oil slick from the rig, 250 kilometres off Australia's northwest coast, now stretches across thousands of kilometres of remote ocean, giving rise to fears of an environmental disaster. Indonesia said last week that thousands of dead fish and clumps of oil have been found drifting near its coastline. Fiji's military leader, Vorige Bainimarama, has ordered the senior diplomats of Australia and New Zealand to leave Fiji within 24 hours. Commodore Bainimarama accused the High Commissioners of interfering in Fiji's internal affairs. Correspondents say the expulsions escalate a dispute over the recruitment of Sri Lankan judges to replace Fijian judges dismissed earlier this year. A day after demanding direct talks with the United States, North Korea says it's finished reprocessing spent nuclear fuel rods and that it's extracted weapons-grade plutonium from the material. It says 8,000 of the rods have been reprocessed at Yongbyon, the nuclear complex which other countries are trying to persuade it to shut down. North Korea said yesterday that if the Americans didn't agree to bilateral talks on its nuclear program, it would, as it put it, go its own way. In the United States, the founder of a multi-million-dollar online gambling company has been sentenced to over 4 years in jail and ordered to forfeit over $43 million in illicit earnings. Gary Kaplan had pleaded guilty to various charges of fraud and racketeering relating to his company, Bet on Sport. Finally tonight, 2 senior American officials are beginning a 2-day visit to Burma in what would be the highest level contact between the two governments for 14 years. Assistant Secretary of State Kurt Campbell, the top US diplomat for East Asia, and his deputy are expected to meet Burma's Prime Minister General Thein Sein, as well as the detained democracy leader Aung San Suu Kyi. It's the latest development in the new US policy of engagement with the reclusive Burmese leadership. That's the world this Friday. Thanks for listening. Good night.